Hello, I'm Marnie Pratt, local history librarian at the Wood County District Public Library. Today is Friday, March 6th, 2015, and I'm speaking with Karen Cota. I'd like to welcome you here today, Karen, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us about your life and your experiences here in our Bowling Green community. Just to introduce you a little bit for our audiences, you worked for 34 years with the Sentinel Tribune.
That's right.
In several capacities, most notably as the editor of the Lifestyles Daily section. Before that, you worked as a features section writer for the Lima News. You earned your degree in journalism from Bowling Green State University. And then in 2005, you were honored by the Associated Press as Ohio's Feature Writer of the Year.
True.
And in 2005, you were named Bowling Green's Woman of the Year by the American Association of University Women. You are a member of the University Women at BGSU and the Wood County Hospital Guild as well.
True.
So quite a number of capacities that you are involved here.
It gets me familiar with a lot of people in town.
Yes. So, all right. You've been here in Bowling Green for many years, but you did not actually grow up here. You grew up on a farm in Putnam County.
Correct. Yes, I grew up. It was midway between Leipzig, population 2,000, Miller City, population a few hundred. So
okay,
small.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about your family and what it was like to grow up on a farm in the area?
All right. So born in 1957, oldest of three kids. And my dad, full-time farmer, was both grain and livestock in the early years. And mom had a bachelor's degree and was a home economist. She had worked as an county extension agent prior to the marriage. So that turns out to be very helpful when I come along with a few extra issues. My parents, I think you have to give them 4 gold stars for raising kids who absolutely didn't know boundaries and weren't assigned artificial boundaries. So, for example, it was a farm, and I was made to feel that I was a valued member, contributing member of the family. I remember at one season in particular, there must have been problems with the combine. It wasn't picking up all the corn during harvest. And so Dad brought the whole family out one day, and we started walking the rows and picking up the loose ears of corn. And he had me out there, as well as my brother. Littlest brother was too young. And, just all the way down, all the way back. I used to be able to walk all over the place. It was great. Then there was another incident where I was actually driving the tractor, but of course I couldn't reach the pedals sitting, so I had to stand. So I got like this. Here's the wheel, and I've got my foot, like that. And Dad would jump on at the beginning of the row, get it going. I would steer all the way across the field while Mom and Dad and the aforementioned brother, Tim, would throw, I think there was a lot of rocks pushed up by the winter that year, so they were throwing rocks onto the wagon that I was pulling, I think. So we get to the end of the road, Dad would hop on, help me, I would turn it, back the other way. So that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you spoke a little bit about what you began to talk about what you feel like your family really instilled upon you. Can you speak a little bit more about that? How do you think your family was responsible for how, your successes later in life?
Seems as though they were always thinking far ahead. I had 5 orthopedic surgeries between the ages of maybe 4 and 11, I'm going to estimate. And they would be done at the beginning of the summers of the school year, and so I would lose my summers. But it was never allowed to interfere with school, which, maybe grumpy when it came to being able to go swimming or something, but that probably was the right approach. My mom would alter my clothes when I was young, but also I was involved in 4-H early, so I was doing sewing projects, I was doing baking projects. Their example was just, I don't even know how to describe it, just the right approach.
All right, okay. And now you have a family of your own, consisting of your husband, Dan, and daughter, Caroline. I was hoping you might be able to speak a little bit about them, perhaps how you and your husband met. You also, I know when we spoke earlier, described your daughter as a true miracle. So
yes.
I thought you could speak a little bit about
Absolutely
that
the miracle of my life, being able to carry a child and give birth to our daughter Caroline. She was born in 1987, so we've been married 7 years. And early in our marriage, we had maybe assumed that we wouldn't be able to have a family. But actually, our genetics were pretty good. Dan and I are two different types of dwarfism. His is called achondroplasia, which is by far the most common type. Mine is called dystrophic, a lot more unusual. It's a recessive gene condition. So your parents are both carriers unbeknownst to them. That's why it never showed up in either side of my family going all the way back. So Dan and I met at a Little People of America organization New Year's Eve party up in one of the Detroit suburbs. It was at a house party, and lots of new faces, lots of action. And I noticed him. I noticed some other people too that night, and I think he'd probably say the same. Did some dancing. Then along about Valentine's Day, I get this letter. This is back before email and texting and all that. I get this letter from this Karen Cota guy. Very nice. So I answered back, and we had this flurry of letter writing. And then at that point, I was a junior at BGSU, and Dan was going to school in Minneapolis. He had been raised in Fargo, North Dakota. So we were like, are you going to the National Convention this summer? Are you? It was in Dallas that year. And so that was like our second meeting 6 months later in July of '78 in Dallas. And that was when I think we would really say we started going together at that point. Then we would fly to visit each other, which was a huge chunk of change for a couple of undergrads.
That's a hard way to start a relationship.
Little people, you had to travel, you had to do a lot to date, basically. And we do that. It was fine.
All right. And then your daughter, what is she doing now?
Well, Carolyn is another Falcon, BGSU. She graduated in '09 with honors, summa cum laude. I can say that because I'm the mom, I can brag. She is currently working as a what is her title? Psych tech intake coordinator at an outpatient clinic in Rochester, New York. She and her husband, David, got married 2.5 years ago. And she's about to start a master's program there in the summer. So excited for her there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, returning to your own earlier memories, you when we spoke earlier, you have quite a few great stories about your early years in school. What are some of your favorite memories from your years in school?
I really enjoyed school, and I enjoyed almost all of my teachers a lot. Probably the first vivid memory, first grade, was 1963-64. So on November 22nd of 1963, we all know that was the date that JFK, John Kennedy, was assassinated. And since we were first graders, the nuns, it was a Catholic school, so you can imagine how horrific that was for them. We first graders weren't told a thing. So I went home on the bus. I remember my dad sitting me up in this chair. It was a higher than average chair, so I could reach the table at that point, and telling me that Caroline Kennedy's daddy had been shot and killed. And I totally knew what that meant. Very upsetting, very devastating, even as young as I was. The next vivid memories, probably third, fourth grade, I was starting to write books. They're probably 4 pages long, in cursive, little stories, and then I would illustrate them and create the cover for my little book out of a heavier stock paper that I would illustrate, staple it, my little book. I probably did, 4 or 5 books that year. So I think you can tell looking at kids pretty early what they really are.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously a little bit of a tell of where you were headed.
Yeah, a little bit of a tell. 5th grade was the most exciting year by far, because this is 1968. Everything is happening in the country. And we had a young, good-looking, really cool teacher, Miss Smith, of all names. And she, oh my gosh, we had mock presidential elections. And I remember I was Humphrey. I wanted to be Bobby Kennedy, but it's okay, I was Humphrey. At least I wasn't the other guy, right? Nixon. And she was more on the more serious side. The Vietnam War was raging. That was the year of the Tet Offensive. And she was dating, seriously, a lieutenant who was stationed. He was overseas in Vietnam. So one of the things she had us as a class do was to write him letters. So during the period that you were the class secretary, you would be the one actually writing the letter that the class was composing for him. And I got to be the secretary one quarter, so I remember that. And he came back at the end of the school year. It's almost like a movie script. So that was, yeah.
So she was one of your favorite teachers.
Yeah,
then.
definitely.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the next year was Miss Sahagan, and she was not. She was my least favorite, our least favorite. They must have had a teacher shortage at that point because they imported 2 teachers from the Philippines. Miss Jamvora, the music teacher, was lovely, but Miss Sahagan, our homeroom teacher, was not. So we would do things to distract ourselves. And the one thing I remember doing at lunch, we girls would stay in, and I, that year, designed and drew a wedding dress for almost every one of the girls in my class. Just kind of based on what I thought their personality was or their style. Of course, you know, it was a lot of apron skirts and Juliet sleeves with the poofs. It was 1968, 69.
Okay.
So those are the kinds of things I remember. Also reading out the entire library of the school. It was not a huge library, and by 8th grade, I think I'd read everything in there that was of any remote interest. So I was like a kid in a candy shop by the time I hit.
I wish I could read all of our library.
Yeah, the public high school. It was great.
All right. Then in 1975, you came to Bowling Green to go to college for journalism.
I did, yeah.
And this was an interesting time for this major at BGSU. Can you tell me a little bit about
absolutely.
that?
Well, it was, so starting in the fall of 75, we had 700 undergrad journalism majors at BGSU. Completely impossible to believe now. And I think they would attribute that to an effect of the Woodward and Bernstein Watergate expose era. So you got these 2 journalists meeting in the garage with Deep Throat, you know, the secret informant, and just, you know, journalist as crusader, as muckraker, as almost savior, really.
I was going to say almost superhero.
Superhero, that's a better word. We were, as a country, appalled, seriously appalled by what had been happening politically. The break-in of, well, we all know our history.
Yes.
So that was, I think, an impetus for a lot of students, certainly not myself. That wasn't where I was coming from. As a senior in high school, I was the co-editor of the school newspaper. So obviously I was giving it some thought at that point. But I also was, you know, casting about for a career that I could do as a little person. And I thought, well, it's all writing and talking to people. I can certainly do that. So I remember calling or contacting BGSU in high school yet, and having a conversation with Jim Gordon, who was the noted photojournalism professor, getting advice on, you know, what camera I should buy before starting out as an undergrad.
Well, now you said 700 majors. Obviously, all of those were not successful, I would imagine. So what do you think set you apart, as, you know, contributed to your success in journalism?
I'm curious about people. I could listen to other people tell me their stories all day long, and I really truly do believe that indeed every person does have a story.
Okay.
That's gotten me through a lot of assignments that maybe on first gasp didn't maybe look like they're going to be too exciting, and inevitably there was always a story there.
Okay.
Also persistence, the childhood persistence that my parents raised, and creativity. I forgot to mention that my dad bought a '63 Corvette because it was a nice low vehicle, and he created pedal extensions that were on a wood platform that you could just set in and remove for another driver. So again, always thinking ahead, what would make this feasible. So I was kind of trained to do that. What do I need to do to make this happen?
Okay.
Yeah.
Problem solving.
Problem solving.
Very useful skill in life. All right. So then when you graduated from BGSU, as I said a little earlier, you first initially worked for the Lima News.
I did,
And then later the Sentinel Tribune. So can you talk a little bit about both of those positions, what you did in those 2 places?
Okay. Well, I was actually a magazine major, which is something that doesn't even exist anymore. and it hasn't for quite a while at BGSU. So I like to really dive in and give you a real full picture. So for me to get a job right out of college in the features department was absolutely, that was a dream come true. That was wonderful. I had been the editor of the campus magazine, which was a very obscure publication that almost nobody had ever read. But anyway, there was some practice with magazines. Yeah. So going into a newspaper was fine, but I wanted to be able to write those feature stories. And at Lima, that's what I did. Mm-hmm. That, 5
So
days
what then
a week.
prompted you to move to the Sentinel?
Well, at the Sentinel, Dan and I were getting serious, and he had moved from Minneapolis to Ohio, to Toledo is where he got a job. And back then it was typewriters. Eventually he segued into computers, of course. Typewriter repair. And he wasn't about to move anyplace smaller yet. So it was my turn to look elsewhere. And I had, enjoyed Bowling Green thoroughly as an undergrad, so I wanted to look back up this way. And the Sentinel, lo and behold, had an opening, but it was straight news reporting. So I found myself for the first 4 years at the Sentinel doing a lot of night council meetings in outlying communities, particularly Perrysburg, Northwood, Lucky, Perrysburg Township. And it seemed during the early 80s to be all about sewers and zoning. I also was the main person doing obituaries and just whatever needed to be doing. The Sentinel Tribune published a, let me see, sesquicentennial edition, if I've got my years right. I believe that's right.
That sounds,
yeah. So, and that's something I had actually done during a summer job as an undergrad in my hometown of Leipzig. They had hit their 100th anniversary, I guess, so we did a special, interviews, historic. This is another avocation of mine, would be history. Okay. So I loved that. That was great. Okay. Do you want me to tell you about some of the interesting people that I've interviewed at the Sentinel?
Oh, yeah, that was actually my next question. Yes, okay. You've met quite a few interesting people. Yes. So what are some of those people that you've met?
Hey, wow.
Some of the great stories.
Everybody from Ronald Reagan to Gloria Steinem and a lot of people in between. I'm trying to coordinate them in categories. There was, I really did edit a lot of pages or sections in the paper over my years. Early years. There was the arts and entertainment beat, the religion, senior citizen, which is something I continued doing, real estate, even before I was hired as the lifestyles editor in 1984, or promoted. So for arts and entertainment, let's see, Broadway composer Marvin Hamlish. There was a phone interview, obviously. He wasn't here. That was challenging. He wasn't about to make it easy on this neophyte reporter, I remember. He wanted to talk about the movie Sophie's Choice with Meryl Streep. Uh-huh. And I was in my magazine article mindset going to do it through a chronological thing all the way through. So he's like, why are we talking about, whatever it is his first couple movie projects were. Like, excuse me, Mr. Hamlish. We got the story. The Letterman, toward the end of their career. Ricky Nelson, toward the end of his career. These are some of the people that were coming to BG or Toledo. And there were some interesting people at the university, too. I remember Steve Martin actually came to BGSU. I was an undergrad. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. Comedian.
I would imagine he's entertaining to interview.
I did a little bit of freelancing for the BG News, not a lot, a little bit, both photo and story. So that's what I'm remembering back. Okay, other people during the years at the Sentinel. Oh, wow.
You told me a story about who you thought was the most charismatic person.
Oh, yes, the most charismatic person, believe it or not, was Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was wonderful. He had this aura. He really did when you were face-to-face with him. He had come to receive an honorary degree from BGSU, that year. It was the year that our daughter was born, so 1987. Caroline was 3 months old, and I got a nice, long private interview with him before the ceremony. And he was just so interested in hearing all about our little baby, and his assistant was Mr. McFeely on the television show. I forget
the mailman.
The gentleman's real name, but the mailman was his assistant in real life. So he's saying to this guy, send them the album, the book, the tape, everything that they produced. He wanted it sent to our family. It was really sweet. That's a
sweet story.
Quite memorable.
It's nice to know the childhood heroes are
nice
people.
And then there were, I thought back the number of veterans I've interviewed over the decades. I have interviewed veterans from every war, starting with World War I through the Iraq War, every single war. And the World War I was Russ Coffee. Now, Russ Coffee was faculty at BGSU.
Okay.
And so I started doing stories about him when he hit 100. And the last story was when he hit 100, on his death, at 109 years old. He was one of the 3 surviving World War I vets in all of the United States of America at that point. They were down to 3. Wow. Russ told me about the time that John F. Kennedy came to BGSU campaigning, would have been, I suppose, 1960. And Kennedy had a real bad back from his being injured in the PT-109 accident during World War II. So he needed to get a little bit of respite off stage at a quiet location in the Student Union. And Russ Coffee escorted him there, and they spent some private time doing that. I remember that story in particular. World War II, there was a Silver Star medal winner from the Pemberville area, a farmer. Sorry, I don't remember his name, but you have to really prove yourself quite brave to win a Silver Star. That was quite something. And then Vietnam, I remember interviewing, this was back at the Lima News, a soldier who had been exposed to Agent Orange and whose firstborn was born with just terrible deformities that were attributed to the exposure to the chemical exfoliant. That was tragic. I remember that very well. And then the Iraq War stories, there were a couple of times I did interviews with, it used to be the thing for, back then it was females to write letters, or anybody, people in general, to write letters addressed to any service person, any serviceman. So we had a couple of romances that began with soldiers pulling this particular letter out of the mail bag overseas and connecting with, in one case, a preschool teacher at First United Methodist here in Bowling Green. I remember that story.
All right. Well, I think those stories perhaps get a little bit at my next question, but maybe you can speak a little bit more about it. In the piece that you wrote for the Sentinel Tribune upon your departure, you said that, this is, I believe, a direct quote, telling the feature stories of Wood County's own citizens for 34 years has been a gold-plated privilege even more exciting than rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous. So can you speak a little bit about why you feel that way, that's so important?
Yes, I do strongly feel that. It is a huge privilege that people will open their hearts up to you and share maybe some of the hardest moments in their lives. I'm thinking particularly of a story that I wrote just in the last year at the Sentinel, last year of my career, and that would be Karen and Gary Bell. They lost their son, Brian. He was actually murdered by a stalker ex-girlfriend, someone that he hadn't even dated for like 7 years. She traveled across 3 states, showed up, hid in his apartment while he was working. He was a manager at a TGI Fridays, a talented chef. And when he came home from work, it's late at night, and she shot him after he'd gone to bed. She murdered him. So it wasn't even just only the tragedy of losing their only son, but the fact that it took 3 years for this woman's trial date to begin. And she had not spent 1 day in prison during that 3-year period. She was free as a bird. So the Bells really opened up their hearts and shared with me what that was like. I remember a young woman named Crystal Soltis doing the same thing. Crystal had spina bifida, and she had, if you could see the inside of her legs, it was terribly abnormal. how things were, the musculature and the bones and everything, I guess. So she had, 35 surgeries, if memory serves me correct, trying to hang on to the legs and, make them work for her. And she was in such pain by the time she was an undergrad at BGSU that finally, and I think she was very serious with her young man at that point, she made the courageous decision to have them remove the leg, amputate the leg that she had been trying so many years and so hard to save. Mm-hmm. So then she had to learn to walk, of course, with prosthesis. The young man, they got a lot more serious during this period. They ended up marrying, and he ended up changing his career path to become an expert in making prosthesis, in fact.
Wow.
Yeah. So those are a couple of the stories that really strike home. But even just things as on the surface lighthearted as the Crooks Corner column, which was something that I started writing in 2005. That was one story every week without fail. So that was a bit of a challenge, finding people that were willing, first of all, to share a recipe. Sometimes this was a closely guarded family secret.
Oh, sure.
Somebody would tell me about this great dish, but maybe they would or wouldn't be willing to share it. So even there, you never knew, or people had to be willing to just really open themselves up to you and welcome you into their homes like you were family.
Sure.
For a short period of time.
You also have a story that is a humorous story. I remember you telling me about how you saved the day at one point.
I was the savior of newspapers all across the country. The Dear Abby column fell into my arena as lifestyles editor. So a daily column, you'd get them from the news syndicate about 2 weeks ahead, and you'd have to prep them so they would be ready in the style that the Sentinel, we wanted them to go in the Sentinel. And write the headline for it or whatever. Anyway, so I'm looking at this one column, reading it ahead, and I'm like, this is extremely familiar sounding. So familiar, in fact, that I know for a fact that this letter is a scam. Somebody's trying to scam Abby. It was the plot, almost exactly, of a Simpsons episode. Homer Simpson, you might remember this, some of you. It's Marge's birthday, and he buys her, for her birthday present, a bowling ball. He has drilled the holes to fit his hand. Not cool, Homer. Marge is quite peeved and goes, she's going to show him, so she's going to take bowling lessons from this studly Italian gentleman, and it goes on and on. Anyway, so I called the syndicate and said, you might want to revisit that, source of that letter. I do believe that it's not the real deal.
It's not legit.
Yeah. So they then sent out an AP meet all the papers referring to this, I don't know, something like eagle-eyed or astute or whatever editor. They didn't name me, but it was fun. Anonymously, I was famous.
All right. Well, you clearly had a very successful career as a journalist, but what would you have done had you not if things had, I don't know, if your life had taken a different path, what do you think you would have done and
how
why?
about this? If I could be two people, because I wouldn't want to give up journalism.
Okay.
If I could be someone else, or start right now in with a whole new, it would be history teacher, American history teacher, high school.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And what about that is so?
Okay. I'm a history nerd. My friends know that. Civil War, Gettysburg, and in particular Abraham Lincoln, who I think is absolutely the greatest person who ever lived. I'm fascinated by Lincoln because of the way he grew in terms of his ethics and his morals and his writing ability, his reasoning, his everything. He was self-taught, a self-taught general, a self-taught politician and writer. And I would like to be able to instill in young people the enthusiasm that I feel for the people that have gone before us and that have helped us build our country and our world. And that really sounds maybe naive, but I do kind of feel that way,
All right. Well, all right. Well, are there any things that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about? Something that you feel is important to your time here in the Bowling Green community, or any stories that you'd really like to touch on yet?
Well, let's see. I couldn't have enjoyed being an undergrad more. This was an era of Let's see. I said we had Steve Martin on campus. We had coffee shops in the old student union. So you've got dark lighting and the candle dripping on the wine bottle, and the guys up there playing the guitar. You know,
That sounds very
soulful
different than
balladeer. It was just lovely. I remember the Holiday Inn was quite the place. It was where you went to take your parents would take you to dinner. You know, if they came to town. Or maybe your professors, if you had some real big deal thing going on. So we would have dinner at the old Holiday Inn. And I remember they had a dinner theater there. I remember going to see Godspell. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Those are the things I enjoy. Theater was important to me, even though you're not going to have too many little people who are the leads in the theatrical production, although I was one of the mamas in Fiddler on the Roof in high school. So that was kind of fun.
That's cool.
So was Carolyn.
In the same
Fiddler on the
production?
Roof came to BG High School in 2004, I think. So that's kind of fun. Things circle around.
I was just going to say, it comes
in
full
my
circle.
life, maybe everybody's life.
Yeah.
You know, the little books I was writing when I was a kid to the writing later. The little illustrations I was doing. Then I was illustrating, actually at the Sentinel in early years. Editor Dave Miller had me do illustrations sometimes.
Okay.
So that was kind of fun. That he was quite open to allowing people to use whatever gifts they thought they were bringing to the job.
Sure.
He didn't tend to pen you in. I appreciated that.
All right.
I'm just sort of going all over the place. But.
No, you have some great stories. All right, well, those are my questions, and I want to thank you again for taking the time out today to speak with us and share your very exciting life.
Thank you, Marty. It's a privilege. I appreciate it. Oh, and I love the Wood County District Public Library.
Well, thank you.
Now more than ever, now that I have time.